Late at night, the office building was brightly lit. Paul pulled me in, but unfortunately, the press conference had already begun. Victor sat calmly under the spotlight. Ding! Wisnovel reminds you to click the subscribe button in the bottom right corner to read the complete novel. I heard that the reason for your broken engagement was due to a third party's interference. He handled the questions from the reporters with ease. There were some differences between Miss Heidi and me, so we parted ways amicably. Paul's face turned pale, and he tightly grasped my wrist, not allowing me to leave. But according to insiders, you have rekindled your old flame with your first love. Victor remained composed. It's all rumors. If there are no other questions, then today's press conference ends here. Just as he stood up, someone suddenly shouted, "She's here! It's her!" All the cameras instantly turned towards us. I was exposed under the spotlight, looking disheveled and bewildered. Reporters swarmed in, and within a few seconds, I was completely surrounded. One question after another was thrown at me. What is your relationship with Victor Wilson? Did you really interfere in someone else's marriage? The shutter sounds were incessant. Victor's smile suddenly froze, and he pushed through the crowd towards me. No, I didn't. I weakly tried to argue, but my voice was quickly drowned out by their intense curiosity, and the questions kept coming. "We have breaking news," a reporter exclaimed excitedly, holding up a phone with my voice coming from it. In that voice, there was a sobbing and a hint of drunkenness, like a murmur. "Victor, I love you." It was a recording. I felt a sense of panic. I had thought that nothing could make my life any worse. But when this storm truly arrived, I was completely destroyed. Isn't she just a homewrecker? Shameless. The murmurs of the crowd felt like a slap to my face. The color drained from my face, and the recording nailed me to the pillar of shame. "I'm sorry. Paul, take her away." Victor pushed through the crowd, and for the first time, a look of panic appeared on his face. Everything turned hazy before my eyes. I heard someone reciting slowly, word by word. Her father is in debt, her mother committed suicide, and she herself suffers from a severe hereditary depression and has been locked up in the Southern City Mental Hospital for 5 years. Isn't she just a lunatic? A stone thrown into the water causes 1,000 ripples. The crowd was in an uproar. Why let a lunatic out to harm people? She's sick. Why doesn't she just die? Victor's steps halted, and he suddenly looked up at me. Shock, disbelief, incredulity. Helplessly, I sat among the noisy crowd, feeling my blood turn cold until my whole body was freezing. "Jasmine," Victor called out to me, his voice trembling. I knew what was coming next. I just sat there calmly, waiting for the guillotine to fall and completely ruin my life. She was also raped by someone before. This was the last sentence of the anonymous tip-off. When Victor heard it, his face turned ashen as paper. Since that day when he came back from the company, Victor Wilson had not spoken a word. The blinds had been closed for 3 days, and the light couldn't squeeze into the dim room. Missed calls on his phone had taken over the screen. He didn't bother to open any of them. Time seemed to have pressed the pause button on him. Victor sat there, head drooping, devoid of life. He still remembered the cold tone of the man who took Jasmine Fisher away. He said, "We all hope she can survive. Mr. Wilson is truly iron-fisted. You effortlessly rendered all our efforts in vain." Ariel was stopped by the security guard outside, yelling at him. "Victor Wilson, do you know that she'll get sick if she doesn't take her medicine? Locking her up is no different from murder, depression, psychiatric hospital." These terms, like numerous sharp thorns, wantonly stirred up in his mind, ruthlessly tugging at his nerves. Paul Gill knocked on the door, then finally opened a crack and stood at the doorway. "Victor, are you feeling any better?" "Why?" Victor's voice was hoarse, and the dull pain in his chest made him wish for death. Paul Gill fell silent for a moment. "I'm sorry. I didn't think it was necessary to check on her situation, so." "The information was fake, wasn't it?" Victor's voice was very soft. "Paul Gill, when you told me she had changed several boyfriends abroad, Jasmine was actually being kept in a psychiatric hospital in South City." "I'm sorry. I didn't know." This explanation sounded feeble and powerless. He knew he couldn't blame Paul entirely. If he had asked a little more, maybe it wouldn't have turned out like this. Victor no longer had the energy to listen to Paul's defense. Ariel disregarded the secretary's obstruction and pushed the door open. The glaring light made Victor squint, but he didn't stop her. The secretary repeatedly apologized. "Sorry, Mr. Wilson, I couldn't stop her." "Get out," Victor said. The secretary carefully closed the door for them, and the room returned to dimness. Ariel just stood there, seemingly not wanting to have anything to do with him. "Mr. Wilson, there are some things that can be said now." The window was cracked open, and the cold wind was bone-chilling. Victor sat there, motionless, just quietly listening. When you do something wrong, you will always face retribution, sooner or later. Last year, when Jasmine celebrated her birthday, I jokingly asked her who she liked the most in the world. She said, first was her mom, and second was Victor Wilson. Victor closed his eyes, feeling the chill of those words deep in his bones. At that time, she was just recovering from her illness. She only needed to take a small piece of medicine each day to be like a normal person. So this year, to help her clean up her mom's belongings, I brought her back. Ariel's eyes turned red. She always said that when you two broke up, it was too disgraceful. This time, she wanted to meet you properly, even just a glimpse glimpse of her big entrepreneur would be enough, because she knew she wasn't worthy of you anymore. Victor Wilson, is she not worthy of you? Do you know how you got your competition spot? Victor's hand slowly tightened, as if he could see the truth that could crush him. At that time, the spot had already been designated to someone else. Jasmine wrote a report demanding fairness and openness, which led to the spot falling to you. But as a result, she offended many people. So after her father ran away, she and her mother were harassed by many people. An invisible hand gripped Victor's neck, making it difficult for him to breathe. She was bullied. Was it because of this? Ariel continued. When you were out of the province for the competition, you didn't call back for about a week. So you probably didn't know that everything here was turned upside down. The Fisher family fell apart. Her father ran away with another woman. And a bunch of creditors came every day, threatening Jasmine and her mother. Her mother committed suicide and left Jasmine, who was bullied and then fell ill. When she was at her worst, I didn't dare take my eyes off her for a second. She was tortured beyond recognition. Ariel stared at Victor intently. When you had the car accident, Jasmine begged me to let her die. How could you let her go on living? Victor's face turned ashen, and he closed his eyes. The memories of the past few months had been torturing him like crazy. He had tacitly allowed his manager to get Jasmine drunk and send her to his room. He lured her into confessing her true feelings after drinking, and then shamelessly forged a legally worthless fake agreement just to see her struggle and suffer. He humiliated and toyed with her time and time again. Finally, he obsessively had her confined in a private hospital in the suburbs. Ariel had come to see him many times, but he refused to see her. He asked her if she was sick and why she hadn't died back then. Jasmine's eyes became increasingly empty, often staring at him without moving. He mistakenly thought that she still loved him at that time. But now, thinking back, Jasmine's silent questioning made him wonder how he could have been so heartless to her. Why didn't you tell me? Ariel cried out. How could I tell you? She's sick, and simply staying alive is a luxury. The only thing she can hope for is that the people she cares about won't be dragged down by her. She values your education more than anything else. That competition was your chance to turn things around, and she fought for it with all she had. She just wanted you to be well. Victor, does she deserve to die? Does she deserve to die? This question hit Victor's heart like a heavy blow. It was him who had tormented her, mocked her, and insulted her with a contract, knowing she was educated. He was the one who deserved to die. We tried many ways to ignite Jasmine's will to survive. In the end, we found that only one thing worked for her, Ariel said with a bitter smile. Victor suddenly couldn't bear to hear more. It's your name that ignites her will to live. She will always remember her big entrepreneur, Victor Wilson. When I left the hospital, I joked with Ariel that I would never come back to this place again. As it turned out, I shouldn't have made such a bold statement. I fell ill again. The winter in North City is a bit drier, with freezing rain in previous years, but this year it unexpectedly snowed. The doctor and nurses chatted and remarked, "This year is unusually cold. Tisk, the Earth's climate is becoming increasingly unsuitable for human survival." The new year was approaching, and the tree branches outside the window were bare, with not a single leaf left. I pressed my face against the window, breathing out a layer of mist. There's someone downstairs. Doesn't he feel cold standing there every day? Ariel walked by expressionlessly, holding a cup of hot milk. Oh, really? He probably doesn't feel cold. Her mood hasn't been great lately. Even Dr. Hart seemed off, so I was extra careful every day, afraid of irritating the two of them. Ariel paused, seeming to realize that she had startled me, and softened her tone. Drink the milk first, then take the medicine in an hour. Dr. Hart said he would take you to build a snowman tonight. I glanced at the person again and felt that he looked somewhat familiar. Ariel drew the curtains for me. Stop looking, you might hurt your eyes. Okay. I got back into bed, took the medicine, and played games leaning against the pillow. I could hear Ariel and Dr. Hart talking outside. Then he pushed the door open and walked in. I quickly hid my phone and sat up straight. I've taken the medicine. The smell of disinfectant filled the room. Nolan's gaze swept over me, finally resting on my face. Miss Fisher, I won't scold you for playing games. I blushed deeply and slowly took out my phone. How did you know I was playing games? I play too. I'm very familiar with the background music. Nolan Hart washed his hands, took off his white coat, and looked at me through the mirror with a slight smile. Aren't you going to get dressed? We agreed to make a snowman together. He was a doctor in the thoracic surgery department of the hospital. The first time I met him seemed like in the autumn. The weather was unusually clear, and I was picking up a ball of yarn that suddenly appeared outside the fence. Nolan Hart walked by and looked down at me. I was panting with fatigue. Excuse me, could you help me pick this up? He looked up at the hospital sign and said, according to the rules, you can't touch anything dangerous. Seeing that I didn't move, he asked, why What do you want to do? Jump rope. Nolan Hart looked at the time and squatted down. Then I'll play with you, and after we finish, I'll take the rope with me. His lunch break was short, and I quietly reached out through the fence to play with him for a while. When he was about to leave, I said, "Thank you." Later, I met him a few more times. He was very busy and didn't pay attention to me, until one day, he came again and took out the jump rope. "Sorry, I've been too busy lately." Later, he started chatting with me. "You seem to be a person of few words." Well, I can't say too much. Why? I'm sick, and probably can't say anything happy. I can't dump emotional garbage on others. Nolan Hart stared at me without speaking at that time. Later, he came more frequently. Sometimes he looked very tired. I tried to learn a few jokes and tell them to him. Every time, Nolan Hart gazed at me with gentle eyes. He asked, "Jasmine, what is your wish?" "I hope everyone is happy, including myself." I quickly put on my clothes and waited for Nolan to put on his down jacket. He held my hand and we went downstairs. There is a security checkpoint every few steps here. Only he can take me out. Under the night sky, the snow fell heavily, and my hat quickly turned white. Nolan Hart handed me a small shovel. "Take it easy." "Okay." The cold air inexplicably lifted my spirits, and I walked around the frozen fountain with the shovel in hand. Turning around, I suddenly saw Victor Wilson standing not far away. His eyes were bloodshot, and his chin was covered in stubble, just looking at me like that. "Victor Wilson?" I spoke lightly, somewhat surprised. Victor's lips moved. "Jasmine, I was wrong. In the past, I would have been proud and arrogant in response. What did you do wrong?" But now, I just held the snow shovel and looked down awkwardly. "It's nothing. I have experienced too much suffering, and my edges have long been smoothed out." The wind and snow howled in the dark night. Victor slowly approached, squatted in front of me, and spoke with a hoarse voice. "How can it be nothing? Jasmine, please say something to me, okay?" I thought for a moment and said seriously, "Here's to our new year. Good health." In that moment, all the color drained from Victor's face. Tears streamed down his face, trembling. "Don't treat me like this, I beg you." I touched his face, very cold, very cool. So, just like in the past, I held his face and said earnestly, "I wanted to choose a decent way to see you, but it ended up in a mess. Sorry, it's my fault." Victor said, "If only I had. It was my choice to leave your life, and I can't blame anyone else." I said slowly, feeling a little sad. "On the day of the class reunion, I asked the class monitor, and only went after I found out you weren't there. I don't know why he lied to me. I just wanted to hear about you, to see if you were doing well." Victor cried uncontrollably. "Sorry, it was me. It was deliberate." "I see." I smiled, not sure how I felt inside. "Jasmine, I'm sorry I couldn't be there for you when you needed me the most." Victor held my hand and finally discovered the scar on my wrist. "You don't need to feel sorry. I didn't want to force you to stay. If you had stayed at that time, many years later, we might have gone through hard times together, would have brought up old grievances during arguments, and would have kept accounts of who owed whom.